My dear viewers watching right now, it pains my heart to begin this conversation. Last week, the doctor told me my time is shorter than a summer dress. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I won't see next summer, he said with that face doctors make when there's no hope left. But before I leave this world, I needed to share my story. A story of pain, of shame, but also of overcoming. A little girl who was abused by her own grandfather, who almost lost her will to live, but who turned her life around. If I'm sharing this now, it's because I know many people are going through the same hell I went through, suffering in silence, thinking there's no way out. There is, folks. There really is. Before I continue, I ask everyone to comment where you're watching from to give me strength in this difficult time of my humble life. And please like this video. I love each and every one of you. My name is Louise Carter. I'm 75 years old and here in Brunswick, Georgia. Everyone knows me as Nurse Mary from Memorial Hospital. Not that I'm a registered nurse anymore. I'm retired now. I was a floor nurse most of my life. Learned through practice how to advise people on headache medicine, stomach remedies, ointments for wounds. Ironic that now not all the medicine in the world can save me. I was born in a simple house in Willow Creek, about 5 miles outside of town. Wooden shack, dirt floor, a roof that let you see the stars on cloudless nights. It was me, my mother Sheila, my grandmother Antonia, who could barely get out of bed because of her swollen legs that couldn't support her body anymore, and my grandfather Gerald, who was the man of the house since my father went out for cigarettes and never came back. The truth is, my father never even knew me. He disappeared when he found out my mother was pregnant. She was 15. He was in his 20s and responsibility wasn't his strong suit. My mother returned to her parents' home head down, carrying in her womb the shame that in those days came with having a child without a husband. My grandfather Gerald never let her forget that sin. He was a tall, stocky man with thick eyebrows that joined together when he got angry, which happened practically every day. He worked at the paper mill from sun up to sundown. He'd come home smelling of sour sweat, wood pulp, and cheap whiskey. You're the one who opened your legs for the first man who came along. Now deal with it, he would tell my mother almost every night, especially after the bottle was half empty. You brought this bastard into the world. Now it's your cross to bear. I grew up hearing this, grew up knowing I was a burden, a mistake, a cross. My mother never answered him back. She worked as a washerwoman for wealthy families, leaving before the sun was up and returning with red hands and shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She spoke little, smiled even less. Life had taken away any will to fight back. My grandmother Antonia was more affectionate when my grandfather wasn't around. She told me stories, taught me songs, stroked my head until I fell asleep. But as soon as she heard his footsteps approaching, she'd send me to my room, lower her head, and stay quiet. The man of the house must be respected, she would say, as if repeating a prayer someone had taught her. It was she who taught me to read, hidden from my grandfather. Girls don't need school, he would yell when my mother talked about enrolling me. She'll learn foolishness, get knocked up like her mother. So my grandmother taught me letters and numbers using twigs on the dirt ground in the backyard, erasing everything when he arrived. We were dirt poor. Our house had only 2 rooms. The living room that was also the kitchen with a wood stove in one corner, a crooked table in the middle, and a bedroom where we all slept. My mother and I on a mat on the floor, my grandparents on a bed made of sticks that creaked from age. The bathroom was an outhouse made of straw in the back of the yard, with a hole in the ground that stank in summer and overflowed during the rainy season. We ate what we could. Beans with cornbread most days, Sometimes fish when a neighbour caught extra and shared boiled green plantains to stave off hunger. Meat only on very special occasions, or when my grandfather spent his entire week's pay on a bender and brought in his guilt the next day, a piece of jerky to please the women. Life was hard, but as much as possible we carried on. My mother worked more and more, taking house-cleaning jobs, laundry, whatever appeared. I helped as I could, learning from an early age to wash, iron, cook. My grandmother got worse with each winter, her legs swelling more, her breathing becoming more difficult until she rarely left the bed. And my grandfather, he was always a difficult man. Loud, heavy-handed. He hit my mother for any reason. Unsalted food, poorly ironed clothes, a look he interpreted as defiance. I grew up fearing him, hiding when I heard his footsteps, trembling when his voice rose. But everything got worse when I turned 12 and my body began to change. Suddenly, the way he looked at me was different. It wasn't just anger or impatience anymore. It was something I can't quite explain, something that made me feel dirty just receiving it. He started making comments when he passed by me. Turning into a little woman, huh? Or, who would have thought you'd fill out like that? My grandmother noticed. One day she called me to her bed, took my hand with those gnarled, swollen fingers, and whispered, "Don't stay alone with your grandfather, my child. If he arrives and your mother's not home, go to Miss Jolene's house. Make up any excuse, but don't stay here." I didn't fully understand at the time, or maybe I didn't want to understand, but I became more careful, avoiding being at home when my mother wasn't there. I'd go to school even without supplies, staying there, helping the teacher clean the classroom, just to avoid returning early. On weekends, I offered to help neighbours with small children, with yards to sweep, with anything that would keep me away from home. But on a Saturday in October, I remember to this day it was Columbus Day weekend. There was no escaping. It rained so hard that the streets had turned into rivers of red mud. My mother had gone to deliver clean laundry to a farm 3 miles from home and wouldn't return until Sunday. And my grandmother was worse than ever with a high fever that left her between conscious and delirious. I was taking care of her as best I could, putting wet cloths on her forehead, giving water to her dry mouth, quietly praying all the prayers I knew. That's when I heard the front door slam. It was my grandfather arriving earlier than usual from the mill, soaking wet from rain and already reeking of whiskey. "Where's the food?" he shouted from the living room. "I'll make it now, Grandpa," I replied, leaving the bedroom. "I was taking care of Grandma. Her fever won't break." He looked at me in a way that froze me in place. "Your grandmother already has 1 foot in the grave anyway." "I'm hungry and cold. I need to eat and warm up." The way he said that, the way his eyes travelled over my body, made me feel a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. I started to tremble, wanting to run away from there. But where to? The storm was punishing the roof. Mud was taking over everything outside. "I'll light the fire and make some cornbread," I said, trying to move away. "Go to the kitchen." He grabbed my arm hard. "The fire I want isn't the kind you light on the stove." What happened next was quick and yet eternal. He dragged me to the bedroom, threw me on the mat where I slept. I remember his weight suffocating me, the smell of wood pulp and sweat making me nauseous, the pain that felt like it would tear me in half. I remember screaming, begging, calling for my mother, for God, for anyone who could save me from that hell. And that's when the unexpected happened. My grandmother, that woman who could barely get up to go to the bathroom, was standing at the bedroom door. I don't know where she found the strength. The fever perhaps gave her an energy she hadn't had in years. She was holding in her hand the wooden saint that stood on the makeshift altar in the living room. A heavy St. Michael made of solid wood. "Get off her, you devil," she said, her voice weak, but full of a fury I had never heard before. My grandfather laughed and continued what he was doing, as if she wasn't there, as if she was just a fly bothering him. That's when the front door opened with a crash. It was my mother, soaked to the bone. The rain had made the creek rise, blocking the path to the farm, and she had returned. She stood there looking at the scene, eyes wide with horror. What happened in the seconds that followed changed our lives forever. My mother, that woman who never raised her voice, who lowered her head to everything, let out a scream that didn't seem human, a scream that held 20 years of humiliation, of fear, of submission, and she charged. Before continuing this story, I'd like to ask you to leave in the comments where you're watching this video from. It warms my heart to know that my voice is reaching far, that I'm not talking to myself. Take the opportunity to subscribe to this channel that helps thousands of women across America and hit the like button too. Each new notification is like a hug that this old woman receives, and in my situation each hug is worth gold. You saw where I stopped, right? With my mother charging like a lioness protecting her cub. I'll never forget what happened next. She jumped on my grandfather's back with a strength that didn't seem like her own, that skinny woman who spent her days scrubbing clothes on washboards. She dug her nails into his neck, drawing blood. He let go of me immediately, trying to get rid of her, cursing, foaming with rage. "You witch, let go of me!" he shouted, spinning like an angry bull, trying to throw my mother off his back. I crawled to the corner, pulling the remains of my torn clothes to cover myself, my whole body aching. I saw when my grandfather managed to throw my mother against the wall. She hit hard, fell to the floor, but soon got up. There was a gleam in her eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't fear anymore, it was a fury that came from somewhere else. My grandmother, still holding the wooden St. Michael, was near the door. My grandfather didn't see her there. He turned to my mother, belt already in hand. "Now you'll see what happens to a woman who meddles where she shouldn't." That's when my grandmother, that sick old lady who could barely walk, hit the saint statue on his head with a force that could only have come from God. The sound was horrible, a dry crack like when you break a thick tree branch. My grandfather stood still for a second as if he hadn't understood what had happened. Then he toppled sideways like a felled tree, knocking over the table on his way down. A silence fell that seemed to have no end. All that could be heard was the rain hitting the roof and our labored breathing. The three of us, me, my mother, and my grandmother, looking at my grandfather's body stretched out on the floor. A trickle of blood running from his head and mixing with the dust on the dirt floor. "Is he dead?" was all I could ask, my voice barely coming out. My mother approached him slowly, like someone approaching a snake that might be pretending to be dead. She knelt, put her hand on his neck, feeling for a pulse. Then she turned to us, her face a mixture of horror and relief. "He's still breathing, but he's bad." My grandmother let the saint fall to the floor. Her legs, already weak normally, seemed to have lost all strength. She slid down the wall until she sat on the floor. "If he recovers, he'll kill all three of us," she said, her voice firmer than I had ever heard. "Sheila, you know what needs to be done." The two of them looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Something passed between them in that look. A silent understanding, a decision that needed no words. My mother nodded, took a deep breath, and turned to me. "Go to Miss Jolene's house. Say you're scared of the storm that we asked you to stay there tonight. Don't tell anything about what happened here. If they ask about your grandfather, say he left before the rain got heavy and hasn't returned yet. But, Mum, what about you and Grandma? What are you going to do? The less you know, the better. It will be better for everyone. Go, daughter. Trust your mother." I looked at my grandmother, looking for some sign that I should stay, but she nodded. telling me to obey my mother. I ran out into the rain, not caring about the mud, about the water that soaked me to the bone. I ran as if the devil was at my heels. In a way, he was. Miss Jolene was our closest neighbour, which still meant quite a walk. When I arrived at her door, I was dripping water, trembling. I don't know if from cold, from fear, or from the pain that pulsed between my legs. Lord have mercy, child. What happened? I told the story my mother had made up, that I was afraid of the storm, that the house was leaking water from the roof, that they had sent me there. Miss Jolene didn't ask anything else. She gave me dry clothes from her daughter, a girl who had already married and moved away, and a hot bowl of chicken and dumplings. Then she put me on a mat near the wood stove where embers were still warming the environment. I couldn't sleep properly that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of my grandfather, his smell, the pain. I saw St. Michael hitting his head, the blood on the floor. I wondered what my mother and grandmother had done after I left. If he had woken up, if he had killed them. If they had, the next day the rain had stopped. A weak sun was trying to break through the heavy clouds that still covered the sky. I said goodbye to Miss Jolene, thanked her for the hospitality, and started walking back home. My legs seemed to weigh tons. Each step was a huge effort. When I arrived, I found my mother sweeping the yard as if it were any ordinary day. Her face was serene, almost peaceful. When she saw me, she smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. "Good morning, my daughter. Did you sleep well at Miss Jolene's?" I looked around, looking for some sign of what had happened the night before. The yard was clean. Inside the house, the floor had been washed. The table that had fallen was in place. There was no sign of struggle or blood, and no sign of my grandfather. "Where is he?" I asked, not brave enough to say the name. "Your grandfather." "He left, went away. He's not coming back." The way she said it, firm, definitive, made me understand that I shouldn't ask more questions. At least not there. Not at that moment. I entered the house somewhat suspiciously, finding all that calm strange. My grandmother was in bed, as always, her trembling hands holding a rosary. When she saw me, she motioned for me to come closer. "My granddaughter," she whispered. "No one is ever going to hurt you in this house again. Never again." Something in her voice, in her look, told me it was true, that my grandfather, wherever he was, would not return to torment us. "We need to talk," my mother said, sitting with us in the bedroom. "What happened yesterday cannot leave these walls. To everyone, your grandfather left us just like your father did. He went away after another woman in another town." "Understood," I nodded. "And if they ask why he didn't say goodbye, why he didn't take his things? When a man takes it in his head to run off with another woman, he goes as he is," my grandmother completed. "He leaves everything behind. That's what happened. And that's that." That same afternoon, my mother took the few clothes of my grandfather and threw them all in a bonfire she made in the backyard. She said it was to ward off bad luck. When the fire began to die, she threw a handful of coarse salt on the embers, murmuring words I didn't understand. A ritual to close a chapter, to cleanse the house of his presence. The neighbours, of course, asked about my grandfather. My mother told the story they had agreed upon with a conviction that made even me almost believe it. "A young thing from the mill. Young, pretty," turned his head, she would say, wiping away a tear that didn't exist. "Men of a certain age delude themselves that they're still young. They go looking for adventure and leave their family behind." People believed it easily. It wasn't the first, nor would it be the last time a man abandoned his family that way. No one asked more questions, just shook their heads, saying it was a shame, offering help if we needed it. The days went by. The absence of my grandfather, instead of being missed, brought a peace we had never known before. There were no more shouts or slaps or constant fear. The house, even small and poor, seemed larger, brighter, as if a shadow had been removed from every corner. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother humming while washing clothes. I saw my grandmother smile without having to hide it. As for me, the wounds on my body gradually healed. Those of the soul, well, those would take much longer. I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, feeling his weight on me. I was afraid when men came too close. I could no longer visit neighbours where the husband was present. Any smell of whiskey made me nauseous. My mother noticed. One night, after we finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner, she sat with me on the edge of the bed. "Daughter, we need to talk about what happened. I know it's difficult, that it hurts to remember, but keeping this inside, you will eat away at you like termites eat away at wood, slowly, silently, until one day everything collapses." That night, for the first time, I truly cried about what had happened. No more silent tears of fear or shame, but a loud, desperate cry that came from deep inside. My mother hugged me tightly. Let me soak her shoulder. Let me release everything that was bottled up. "It wasn't your fault," she repeated like a prayer. "It wasn't your fault. He was the monster, not you." After the crying came a kind of calm, like after a storm when the sky is still cloudy but the rain has stopped and you can see a little piece of blue sky between the clouds. "What happened to him?" I finally asked. "Really?" My mother hesitated for a moment, her eyes fixed on some point on the wall. "Your grandfather won't be back," was all she said. "Not to hurt us, not to be arrested for what he did. And it's better we don't know more than that." Later, much later, years later, when I was already an adult, my grandmother told me the truth on a night of high fever when she thought she was going to die. After I left, they tried to help my grandfather, not out of kindness, but because they didn't want to be imprisoned for murder. But he wasn't responding. They spent the night watching over the body, praying, wondering what they would do. In the early morning, when the rain eased a bit, my mother went out with the wheelbarrow we used to carry firewood. She took the body to a deeper part of the creek, which was still full from the rain. She tied rocks to his feet and hands with wire and rope. She said a Lord's Prayer, not for his soul, but for the waters to carry him far away. The next day they tidied the house, cleaned any trace. The creek continued to rise with the rains that week. When it receded, there was no sign of the body. The currents must have carried him all the way to the sea, or buried him in the mud at the bottom. No one ever looked for him. In those days in rural areas, a man who abandoned his family was too common to attract attention. If any acquaintance from the mill found his disappearance strange, no one came to ask at our house. We lived like this for almost a year, the three of us. Life was hard, money was always short. But there was peace, there was respect, there were even some moments of joy. My grandmother taught everything she knew, herbal remedies, blessings, ancient prayers that her mother had taught her. My mother continued working in the homes of wealthy farmers. But now, with her head held high without fear of returning home, I went back to school. The teacher, Miss Ununice, noticed the change in me. Before I was cheerful, talkative. After that rainy night, I became quiet, withdrawn, frightened. She tried to talk, asked if something had happened. I didn't tell, of course. That secret had to be buried as deep as my grandfather must be, but not everything was rosy. The poisonous tongues of the neighborhood began to whisper that it was strange my grandfather had disappeared like that without saying goodbye to anyone, that perhaps he hadn't left of his own will. Suspicious looks began to follow my mother when she went to the store. Questions half disguised about When was the last time we had heard from him? It was then that my mother made a decision that would change the course of our lives. "We're leaving here," she announced one night after dinner. "This land doesn't want us anymore, and we don't need it either." "Where to?" I asked, frightened by the idea of leaving the only place I knew. "Savannah," she said, her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen before. "The big city, a place where nobody knows us, where we can start over without a past, without this story weighing on our shoulders." My grandmother, already very sick at that time, just nodded. "It's for the best. Here, the walls have ears, and the ears have big mouths." And so, on a morning in March 1964, I remember to this day because it was right when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. We took the little we had: old clothes, pots, my grandmother's mattress, the image of the Virgin Mary she had received at her baptism, everything that fit in a borrowed cart that a kinder neighbour helped us take to the bus station in town. We left behind the wooden shack, the yard where I had played as a child, the apple tree loaded with fruit in the backyard. We left the curious neighbours, the unanswered questions, the malicious whispers. We left the creek that had carried away my grandfather, and with him that night of horror. At the bus station, my mother bought 3 one-way tickets to Savannah. When the bus began to pull away, I looked through the dusty window. I saw Willow Creek getting smaller in the distance, the wooden houses blending with the earth. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of relief and fear of the unknown. "Don't look back, my daughter," my mother whispered, holding my hand. "What's past is past. From now on, only look forward." At that moment, crossing the rusty gate that marked the boundary of the property, I didn't know what awaited us. I didn't know that life in the city would be so different, so difficult, and at the same time full of possibilities that I didn't even dream existed. I didn't know that my grandmother would not survive more than a few months in that new life. I didn't know that I was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself. The innocent girl who died that rainy night, giving way to another, marked by pain, but also by the strength that only comes after you survive the impossible. The only thing I knew was that whatever came ahead, it would be better than what was left behind, and that, at that moment, was enough to give me courage to continue the journey. Arriving in Savannah was like landing on another planet. I, who had never left Willow Creek, suddenly found myself in a big city with buildings, pavement, cars honking, people running everywhere. My small-town girl eyes couldn't absorb so much novelty at once. The first week we stayed in a cheap boarding house room near the port, a dark cubicle that I shared with my mother and grandmother. The 3 of us crammed into one bed. The bathroom was communal at the end of the hall, always with a line. The food came from a lunchbox that my mother brought from the job she found on the second day. A cleaning lady in a family home in the historic district where the rich people of the city lived. My grandmother got worse with the move. The humid air of the city mixed with car pollution and factory smoke punished her already weak lungs. She coughed day and night, unable to sleep. Rheumatism attacked with force, swelling her already deformed joints even more. "Don't worry about me," she would say when she noticed our concern. "I've lived what I had to live. I helped get you out of that hell. Now I can rest in peace. Even sick, it was she who taught me how to get by in the big city, how to ride the bus without being cheated out of change, how to recognize dangerous types who hung around on street corners, how to stretch the little money we had buying at the end of the market when prices dropped. While my mother worked, I took care of my grandmother and looked for work. It wasn't easy. I was only 13, had no official education, no experience. Doors closed as soon as they looked at me, a skinny girl from the countryside with a heavy accent and patched clothes. 3 months after arriving in Savannah, we managed to rent a shack in a poor neighborhood east of the city. It was small, but at least it was ours, without neighbors on the other side of the wall, without a line for the bathroom. My mother had been promoted in the house where she worked, from cleaning lady to cook. She earned a little better, brought leftovers that the boss allowed, sometimes even used clothes that fit me. It was during this time that I met Miss Carmen, our neighbor on the right, a black lady in her 50s, widowed, who sold sweet potato pies on the riverfront. In the first few days, she appeared with a plate of hominy grits, welcoming us. When she saw the state of my grandmother, she didn't think twice. "This lady needs a tea of blackberry leaves with Tupelo honey. I'll fetch it from my house." The tea didn't cure my grandmother. At that point, nothing would, but it eased the cough, gave a little comfort. Miss Carmen started coming every day, bringing herbs, prayers, affection. She was a midwife in her spare time, new remedies for everything. What doctors do with a scalpel, I do with my hands and my plants, she would say proudly. When I told her vaguely what had happened in the countryside, without going into details about what my grandfather had done or how he had gone away, Miss Carmen squeezed my hand tightly. "Woman wasn't born to be a punching bag for any man. Your mother and your grandmother did what they had to do. Now it's time to look forward and rebuild." It was she who got me my first job. Her sister had a fruit stand in the farmer's market and needed help. She paid little, in fact, almost nothing. Food, some coins, and leftover fruit that I took home. But it was a start. I woke up at 4 in the morning, helped set up the stand, spent the day shouting, "Look at the bananas, look at the peaches, they're fresh, they're sweet." I returned at dusk, feet swollen from standing so long, but with a few coins in my pocket. Every cent I earned went straight into an empty tobacco tin that I hid under the mattress. A woman's money has to be hidden, even from ants, Miss Carmen taught. You never know when you'll need to run away or fend for yourself. My grandmother passed away on a Sunday dawn, 6 months after we arrived in Savannah. It was peaceful in her sleep without suffering, a blessing after so much pain. I woke up to my mother sobbing quietly beside the mat where my grandmother slept. She didn't need to say anything. My grandmother's serene face without the pain lines that had marked her face for years told everything. We had no money for a coffin, much less for a funeral. It was Miss Carmen who organized everything. She gathered the women of the community, washerwomen, maids, prostitutes, vendors like her, and each gave what they could. One knew a guy at the funeral home who gave a friendly price. Another had a cousin who was a gravedigger and arranged a little corner in the cemetery without needing much paperwork. The one from furthest away brought flowers from her own backyard. The oldest led the prayers that afternoon. Seeing all those women, most of them strangers, coming together to help us, I understood something important. There is a strength that is born when women unite. A strength that has nothing to do with muscles or violence, but with solidarity, with the silent understanding of those who have gone through similar pains. My grandmother's death left a huge hole, but it also freed us. She suffered so much that in a way, she kept our pain alive too. After the burial, it was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. We could finally think about really living, not just surviving. My mother decided it was time for me to go back to school. My daughter is not going to spend her life selling fruit at the market, she said firmly. She's going to have an education. She's going to be somebody in life. She enrolled me in a public school near home. I had to start from scratch in first grade, even though I was already 14. I was the oldest in the class, the big one who barely fit in the desk. The children laughed at my heavy accent, my patched clothes, my shy manner. But I didn't care. I was so happy to be there, to have a new notebook, coloured pencils, storybooks that the rest didn't matter. I studied in the morning and worked at the market in the afternoon. I arrived home exhausted, but still found energy to do homework by the light of a kerosene lamp. Sometimes I fell asleep on top of the notebook. My mother would cover me, put out the lamp, and leave a kiss on my forehead. Life gradually improved. My mother got a steady job as a cook in a downtown restaurant. She earned better and had Sundays off. I advanced quickly in school, skipping grades. The teacher said I had a thirst for knowledge, that I absorbed everything like a sponge, but not everything was rosy. The trauma of that rainy night was still there, well kept, but always ready to appear when I let my guard down. I had frequent nightmares. I couldn't be alone with men, even harmless ones like the baker on the corner or the bus driver. At school, I ran from boys like the devil runs from the cross. If any came too close, I would start to tremble, feel nauseous, sometimes even faint. The principal called my mother concerned about my behaviour. "Your daughter is intelligent, diligent, but there's something strange. It seems she's afraid of men." My mother, without telling the truth, said only that I was traumatised because my grandfather had been violent. The principal didn't insist, but recommended that I talk to the school counsellor, Mrs. Nelson. Mrs. Nelson was a lady in her 50s, with auburn hair dyed and tied in a bun, thick glasses on the tip of her nose. At first, I went to the weekly sessions under obligation, sat in the hard chair in front of her desk, and remained silent. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she would say. "You can just stay here, draw, look out the window." Gradually, I began to trust her. First, I talked about trivial things: school, work at the market, the neighbourhood. Then, about missing my grandmother. Finally, one day, I told her everything. What my grandfather had done, how my grandmother and mother had reacted, how he had gone away, how we fled to Savannah. Mrs. Nelson showed no horror, no disgust, no pity. She just listened, her eyes steady on mine behind those thick glasses. When I finished, exhausted and relieved to have taken that weight off of me, she held my hands and hers. "Mary Louise, what happened to you is terrible and nothing will erase that. But you are not alone. You never were. Your mother and grandmother proved that on that night. And I'm here to tell you that you can have a full, happy life without letting that monster continue to destroy you from the inside out." She lent me books, not just school ones, but novels, poetry, stories of strong women who faced difficulties in one. She showed me that the world was much bigger than Willow Creek, bigger even than Savannah. That there were possibilities I hadn't even dreamed of. Transform this pain into strength, she would always tell me. Use it to build, not to destroy. By 16, I was already in middle school. I had left the market and gotten a better job as a cashier at a drugstore downtown. The owner, Mr. Alfred, was a kind old man who soon noticed my interest in medicines, in complicated names, in formulas. "Girl, you have a knack for this," he would say when he saw me reading the labels of medications in my spare time. "You learn fast." He began to teach me the basics of pharmacy, how to organize medications, recognize generics, guide customers on simple dosages. Gradually, I gained confidence. I was no longer the frightened girl who trembled when a man entered the store. I was a professional, serious, competent, who knew what she was talking about. It was during this time that I met Mrs. Zoe, a regular customer at the drugstore, an elegant lady in her 60s who always came to buy blood pressure medication and vitamins. One day, she saw me studying at the counter during a lull. "What are you reading with such concentration?" "My young lady, science book, ma'am." I'm studying for the high school entrance exam. She took the book, leafed through it, returned it to me with a smile. You like to study, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. Yes, ma'am. I want to be a nurse someday. She looked at me for a while as if evaluating me. You know, I was a teacher all my life. Now I'm retired with too much time on my hands. If you want, I can help you with your studies without charging anything, of course. It would be a pleasure to have an interested student again. That's how our private lessons began. 3 times a week after closing the drugstore, I would go to Mrs. Zoe's apartment in the historic district. It was a beautiful place, full of books from floor to ceiling, smelling of fresh coffee and butter cookies. She taught me math, English, science, everything I needed to pass the exams and enter high school. More than that, she taught me to believe in myself, to not see myself as a victim, but as a survivor, to understand that what had happened to me didn't define me. It was just a terrible chapter in a story I was still writing. Choose how your story will continue, she would say. The past is already written. It can't be changed. But the future, the future is blank, waiting for you to pick up the pen. In 1969, at 17, I passed the entrance exam for Savannah High School, the best public school in the city. My mother cried when she received the news. She bought a small cake to celebrate, a rare luxury in our house, and invited Miss Carmen, Mrs. Zoe, and Mr. Alfred, the people who had helped us so much. My daughter is going to be somebody in life, she repeated, proud, her eyes shining with contained tears. She's going to be a nurse. She's going to take care of others. She's going to have the respect we never had. That night, lying on the mat we still used as a bed, I looked at my mother, already asleep on the other side of the room. Her face, even in sleep, maintained that determined expression, that quiet strength that had saved both of us on that stormy night. I thought about my grandmother who, even sick, even weak, had found strength to stand up and defend her granddaughter. I thought about Miss Carmen, Mrs. Zoe, Mrs. Nelson, women who had extended their hand when I needed it most, without asking for anything in return. It was that night that I understood true strength isn't in muscles, in weapons, in violence. It's in the ability to get up after each fall, to extend a hand to those in need, to transform pain into action, trauma into purpose. The path would still be long and difficult. There would be more obstacles, more moments of doubt, more scars to be healed. But that night, for the first time since we left Willow Creek, I felt I had a clear direction, a purpose that went beyond simply surviving. I was going to become a healer, not of herbs like Miss Carmen, nor of books like Mrs. Zoe, but someone who understood others' pain because she knew her own all too well. Someone who could perhaps help other girls who had gone through the same hell I had. The future was blank, waiting for me to pick up the pen, and I was ready to start writing. Savannah High School was my biggest challenge yet. When I stepped into those immense corridors with marble floors and walls full of pictures of illustrious graduates, I felt I didn't belong there. Most students came from middle-class families, had parents who were doctors, lawyers, teachers. I was the cook's daughter, resident of the poor side of town, who worked in a drugstore to help at home. In the first days, I always sat at the back of the class trying to make myself invisible. I didn't open my mouth even when I knew the answer. The country accent still marked my speech, and I was terrified of becoming a laughingstock. I ate lunch alone in the most remote corner of the courtyard with the lunchbox my mother prepared before dawn, before leaving for work. It was the biology teacher who first noticed my potential. Dr. Anderson, a gentleman in his 50s, greying hair and a calm voice that reminded me of my grandfather. Not the monster, but my mother's father, whom I barely knew. Returning a test where I got the highest grade, he stopped at my desk. You have a natural talent for science, Mary Louise. You shouldn't hide it at the back of the classroom. The next day, he brought me a loaned book, Introduction to Human Anatomy. I devoured those pages like someone devouring a romance novel. For the first time, I understood how that complex machine that is the human body worked. I was particularly fascinated by the nervous system, how electrical signals could create thoughts, feelings, memories, perhaps because I wanted to understand what had happened in my own brain after the trauma, why I still woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, why I trembled when men came too close. With Dr. Anderson's encouragement, I began to participate more in classes. Gradually, I gained confidence. In the second year, I no longer sat at the back. I asked questions, answered when teachers asked, even stood up to solve equations on the board in math classes. Not that everything was easy. There were colleagues who mocked my humble origins, my shy way of speaking, the simple clothes I wore. A group of rich girls especially seemed to take pleasure in humiliating me in the hallways. Look at the country girl from the drugstore going to prescribe chamomile tea for us, hillbilly. They would laugh when I passed. At first, I would lower my head and continue on, swallowing tears. But one day, tired of being stepped on, I stopped in the middle of the corridor and faced the leader of the group. Patricia, daughter of a famous doctor in the city. You know what the difference is between you and me, Patricia. You were born with everything ready. I have to fight for every crumb. So, yes, I work in a drugstore with pride, and I'll continue rising in life while you'll continue being just Daddy's girl. The entire corridor went silent. Patricia read with anger or shame. I never could tell which turned her back and left. After that day, they didn't mess with me anymore. We didn't become friends, of course, but at least I gained a silent respect. In 1971, I finished the first year of high school with the best grades in the class. Mr. Alfred, seeing my growing interest in pharmacy, began to teach me more advanced things. How to prepare simple ointments, cough syrups, herb tinctures. I mixed the scientific knowledge I learned in school with the folk wisdom I had inherited from my grandmother and learned from Miss Carmen. Customers began to seek me out, specifically trusting my advice. My mother was radiant with my progress. She had been promoted to head chef at the restaurant, earned better, no longer needed to work so many overtime hours. We managed to move from the east side to a slightly better neighborhood, south side. It was just a one-bedroom apartment, but it had a bathroom inside the house, a luxury we had never had, and was closer to downtown, making it easier to commute to work and school. It was during this time that I met Charles. He was a medical student in his third year and frequented the drugstore to buy material for practical classes: alcohol, gauze, basic medications. At first, I could barely look him in the eyes. Even after years, I still had a dread of young men, especially those who showed any interest in me. But Charles was different, polite, respectful. He always maintained an appropriate distance, never made inappropriate comments. When he noticed my interest in medicine, he began to bring used books from the subjects he had already completed. "You understand more about this than many of my college colleagues," he commented one day after hearing me explain to an elderly customer how to properly take blood pressure medications. Gradually, a cautious friendship was born. We talked about medications, diseases, treatments. He told me interesting cases from the university hospital where he did his internship. I shared the herbal knowledge I had learned from my grandmother and Miss Carmen. My mother, always suspicious of any man who approached me, made a point of meeting him. She invited him for coffee at our home on a Sunday. She prepared cornbread, put the embroidered tablecloth on the table, a gift from her former employer, kept an eye on his every move. "I liked him," she declared after Charles left. He has respect in his eyes. Coming from my mother who had learned in the worst way to distrust men, that was the highest compliment possible. In 1972, I finished high school. Graduation was a moment of glory. Me, daughter of a domestic worker without a father, coming from the countryside, receiving an honor roll diploma as the best student in the class. From the audience, my mother cried silently, too proud even to applaud. Beside her, Mrs. Zoe, Miss Carmen, Mr. Alfred, and to my surprise, Charles, who made a point of bringing flowers. The dream of medical school still seemed too distant. It was very expensive. Even public universities were difficult to get into, and I needed to work. But there was another path, the nursing technical course at the university hospital. It required only a completed high school and had the advantage of being in the evening, allowing me to continue working at the drugstore during the day. I took the test, passed in first place. When classes began in March 1973, I was already 21 years old, much older than most of my classmates, girls of 17, 18 years, freshly out of high school. I also had more practical experience because of my work at the drugstore, which gave me a certain advantage. The course was demanding, theoretical classes at night, internships on weekends. I slept little, studied on the bus, during work breaks, in any gap I could find. But I didn't mind. Each new piece of knowledge brought me closer to the dream of being a nurse, of being able to help people who were suffering. In the second year of the course, I began interning in the gynecology and obstetrics ward. It was there that I found my true calling. Caring for women, especially the most vulnerable, gave me a purpose that went beyond the profession. It was as if each pregnant teenager I welcomed, each woman victim of violence I comforted, was a piece of the girl I once was, needing the help that no one could give me. One case in particular deeply marked this phase. A 14-year-old girl, 7 months pregnant, arrived at the hospital with clear signs of beating. The husband, a man of almost 40, had bought her from her father for a motorcycle and a sack of flour back in the countryside. When she tried to escape, he beat her until she nearly died. The doctor on duty, Dr. Teresa, a woman of strong temperament and sharp tongue, was furious when she saw the state of the girl. She expelled the husband from the room with shouts, threatened to call the police, did everything to protect the patient. I was amazed by her courage, her determination to defend that girl. After they stabilized the girl and admitted her for observation, Dr. Teresa called me to her office. "You have a knack for this, Mary Louise. I saw how you took care of that girl, how you managed to calm her when no one else could. I was just doing my job, Doctor. You did more than that. You have something special. True empathy. That's not taught in any college. It was she who encouraged me to specialize in caring for women victims of violence. At the time, this formal specialization didn't even exist. But she guided me, lent me books, allowed me to accompany delicate cases that came to the hospital. In 1975, I graduated from the technical course, once again with honors. I was 23 years old and had a job offer at the university hospital itself in the gynecology and obstetrics ward. Of course, the salary wasn't the best, but it had a signed work card, health insurance, stability. My mother and I could finally realize a dream to buy a small house of our own in the South Side neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, a small backyard where she planted herbs and seasonings reminiscent of the countryside we had left behind. Charles also graduated that year. He was now in his internship, the last stage before becoming a real doctor. We remained friends, increasingly close. He came to dinner at our house frequently, brought books. We talked about difficult cases, about the challenges of the profession. One day, after one of these dinners, when I was accompanying him to the gate, he held my hand. It was the first time we had any physical contact beyond a formal handshake. I almost pulled my hand back in an automatic reflex of years of fear, but something made me stay. "Can I ask you a question, Mary Louise?" he said, his voice low in the warm night of Savannah. "Of course, why do you never let me get close? I don't just mean physically. You maintain a distance, a barrier that I can't cross." I felt my heart race. In 5 years of friendship, I had never told him about what happened in Willow Creek, about my grandfather, about the rainy night, about the trauma I still carried. "It's a very long story," I replied, looking away. "I have all the time in the world." And there, sitting on the small wall in front of my house under a starry December sky, I told him everything for the second time in my life. The first had been with Mrs. Nelson. I opened that box locked with 7 keys inside me. I spoke of the abuse, of my mother's and grandmother's reaction, of the escape to Savannah, of the invisible scars I still carried. When I finished, I was exhausted, as if I had run a marathon. I couldn't look at him, afraid of what I would see in his eyes: disgust, pity, disappointment. Charles remained silent for a time that seemed eternal. Then, with infinite gentleness, he took my hand again. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me this," he said simply. "I will never do anything that hurts or scares you. I will never cross boundaries you don't want crossed. I just want to be by your side, at your pace, in the way you need." That night, something broke inside me. Not in a bad way, but like a dam that breaks and releases long-held waters. I cried as I hadn't cried since my grandmother's death. I cried for the girl I had been, for the lost innocence, for the stolen time. Charles just stayed there holding my hand without trying to hug me, respecting my space, my rhythm, understanding, as few would understand, that for someone with a trauma like mine, even a well-intentioned hug could be an invasion. From that night on, our relationship changed. It didn't immediately turn into dating. I wasn't ready yet, but the barrier had fallen. I no longer needed to pretend to be strong all the time. I didn't need to hide my scars. For the first time, I was with someone who knew everything and still looked at me with respect, with admiration. Even time passed. I worked at the hospital. Charles graduated and began his residency in pediatrics. We saw each other whenever our schedules allowed. Sometimes we had dinner together in the hospital cafeteria, exhausted after long shifts. Other times we walked along Thai Beach on the rare days off that coincided. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs. There were days when I could hold his hand without trembling, others when the mere thought of intimacy left me in panic. Charles never pressured, never demanded, always respected my pace. In 1977, after almost 2 years of this friendship that was already more than friendship but still had no name, he officially asked me to be his girlfriend. He had finished his residency, been hired as a pediatrician at the same hospital where I worked. He brought flowers, daisies, my favorites, and took me to dinner at a simple but beautiful restaurant by the river. "You don't have to answer now," he said after making the request. "I know it's a difficult step for you. Think carefully." I didn't need to think. For the first time in my life, I was absolutely certain about something related to a man. "Yes," I answered, surprising us both with the quickness of the response. "But you'll have to be patient with me. Very patient." He smiled in that calm way that only he had. "Patience is what I don't lack, Mary Louise. I waited almost 5 years just to be able to hold your hand without you trembling. I can wait as long as it takes for the rest." Our courtship was a healing process for me. Each small gesture of affection, a kiss on the forehead, intertwined fingers, a brief hug, was a victory over trauma. Each barrier I managed to break down was celebrated not as a concession I made to him, but as a liberation I conquered for myself. My mother, always protective, took time to fully accept the relationship. It wasn't because of Charles. She had liked him from the beginning. It was because of the fear of seeing me hurt again, of seeing me relive the trauma. "Men are treacherous creatures, my daughter," she would say when we were alone. "They seem tame but can change at any moment. Your grandfather wasn't always that monster either. In the beginning, he was even affectionate with your grandmother from what she told me." "Charles is different, Mom." "I know it here inside," I would respond, pointing to my heart. "And if he's not, you yourself taught me to be strong. I'm no longer that frightened girl from Willow Creek." In 1978, after a year of dating, we got engaged. It was a simple ceremony at home, just with our closest friends, Miss Carmen, now quite elderly, but still making the best sweet potato pies in the city. Mrs. Zoe, who had become almost a second mother to me, Mr. Alfred, who closed the drugstore early, especially for the occasion. Charles gave me a simple ring, what he could afford with his still modest salary as a newly graduated doctor. But to me, it was worth more than any diamond. It represented not just a commitment between us, but my own victory over the past. That same year, I managed to fulfill another dream, entering nursing school. The hospital had a scholarship program for promising employees, and my boss, Dr. Teresa, made a point of recommending me. I studied in the morning, worked in the afternoon and early evening. It was tough, but each new piece of knowledge acquired gave me more tools to help other women wounded as I had been. Everything finally seemed to be falling into place in my life. I had a job I loved. I was studying. I had a wonderful fiancé, a modest but comfortable house, a healthy mother proud of my progress. The wounds of the past were still there, scars that would never completely disappear, but they no longer bled at every touch, no longer defined who I was or what I could become. But fate, that unpredictable novelist, still had surprises in store for me. And what happened in February 1979 would once again change the course of my life, testing everything I had learned about strength, about healing, about overcoming. February 1979 began like any other summer month in Savannah. Suffocating heat, sun that seemed to want to fry us alive, beaches crowded with northern tourists. I was in the second semester of nursing school, balancing between studies, work at the hospital, and preparations for the wedding scheduled for December that year. Tired, but happier than I had ever been before. It was on a Tuesday, I remember, as if it were today. I arrived home after a tough shift in obstetrics, 3 complicated deliveries in one night. I found my mother sitting on the porch staring at nothing, a crumpled paper in her hand. I knew immediately that something serious had happened. "Mum, what is it?" She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, eyes red from much crying. "A letter," she said, extending the crumpled paper. "From Brunswick." Brunswick was the town closest to Willow Creek from where we had fled 15 years ago. We had never received news from there, nor sought to know. It was a closed chapter, a turned page that we preferred not to revisit. I took the letter with trembling hands. It was from Miss Jolene, that neighbour who took me in on the night of the storm. She wrote that she had found our address through a nephew who worked at the post office in Savannah. The reason for the letter froze my blood. My grandfather was alive. "It's not possible," I said, letting the paper fall. "Mum, you said the creek." "I thought he had died," my mother replied, her voice trembling. "The rocks, the current. No one could survive that, but he survived. According to the letter, he had been found by fishermen downstream nearly dead. Taken to a hospital in Jacksonville, he spent months between life and death. The blow to the head had caused permanent damage. Memory loss, difficulty speaking, paralysis on the right side of the body. "He's coming back," my mother continued, the terror evident in every word. "Miss Jolene says he hired someone to look for us, that he keeps repeating my name and yours, that he wants to settle accounts." The world seemed to collapse around me. 15 years of rebuilding, of healing, of new life, and that ghost reappeared from the past to haunt us. Worse, to threaten us. "He can't do anything, Mom," I tried to say without much conviction. "He's old, sick, and if he comes, we'll report him. Now, we're not just two women alone in an isolated countryside. You don't understand." She shook her head. "It's not just what he can do. It's what he can say." About that night, I understood her fear. Even in self-defense, even protecting her daughter, she would have difficulty explaining what happened afterward. The body in the creek, the escape, the lie we had maintained for so many years, and me, about to graduate, engaged to a respected doctor. How would my reputation hold if everything came to light? That same night, I told Charles everything. He listened in silence, holding my hands that wouldn't stop trembling. When I finished, I expected to see fear, hesitation, perhaps even the decision to distance himself from a family with such a dark secret. "We'll figure it out," was he said with a calmness that amazed me. "I won't let anyone hurt you or your mother. Never again." The next morning, he brought a lawyer friend to talk to us. Attorney Paul didn't want to know details. He said the less he knew, the better he could help us. He only asked the essentials. Was there abuse? Was there a threat to life? Was the reaction proportional to the threat? In this case, he concluded after hearing our answers, "If your grandfather appears with accusations, we have a solid defense, legitimate defense of honor and life. The problem will be explaining why you didn't seek the police at the time." In those days, in that place, police wasn't an option for a poor woman, my mother replied, her voice bitter. They would say it was her fault, that she provoked it, that she deserved it. The lawyer nodded, understanding. "Let's hope it's just a delusion of a sick old man, and that he never appears. But if he does, call me immediately." The following weeks were of constant tension. Each knock on the door, each unfamiliar face on the street left us on alert. My mother could barely sleep, startling at any noise. I returned to having the old nightmares, waking up sweaty in the middle of the night, reliving the terror of that rainy night. Charles was my rock during this period. He started sleeping at our house frequently, in the guest room, of course, respecting the customs of the time. His presence brought some security, the certainty that we were no longer alone. 2 months passed without news. We began to relax, to think that perhaps it was all just a scare. Until one April afternoon, returning from college, I found an old man standing at the gate of my house. Old, thin, leaning on a cane, the right side of his face drooping in an evident paralysis. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Time and disease had completely transformed that tall, strong man who populated my nightmares. "Mary Louise," he said, his voice pasty, difficult to understand. "My granddaughter." I froze in place. The world seemed to stop spinning. There he was, the monster of my nightmares, the shadow that had darkened my childhood, the man who had destroyed my innocence. But now he was nothing more than a sick old man, almost defenseless. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling less than I expected. "To talk. Just talk." I don't know where I found the courage, but I opened the gate and let him in. Perhaps it was the security of being on my territory. in my house, an adult, and no longer a defenseless child. Or perhaps it was simply the need to close that chapter once and for all. We sat on the porch, me in a chair, him on the wooden bench. I maintained distance, eyes fixed on him, ready to run if necessary, but he seemed to have no strength even to get up without the help of his cane. "I thought you had died in the creek," I finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "Almost died," he replied, the good hand smoothing the cane. "Lost a lot that night. Memory, strength, everything." "What did you come here to do? Threaten, denounce? Because if that's it, you can leave. We're not afraid of you." He shook his head. A slow, tired movement. "I came to ask for forgiveness." Those 3 words caught me completely off guard. Of all the things I imagined he might say that had never crossed my mind. "Forgiveness," I repeated, incredulous. "You think a simple forgiveness erases what you did? What you tried to do to me? The hell you put my mother and grandmother through?" "No," he replied, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Nothing erases it. I know that. Then why did you come?" "Because I'm dying." He coughed, a harsh, painful sound. "Lung cancer, few months," the doctor said. I didn't want to go without saying, without asking. I remained silent, observing that broken man in front of me. The hatred I expected to feel didn't come. In its place, a strange mixture of pity and indifference. He no longer had power over me. He was just an old man dying, loaded with late remorse. "I can't forgive you," I finally said. "Nor do I have that right. Forgiveness would have to come from the girl I was that night. And she doesn't exist anymore. You killed her." He nodded slowly. "I understand. What you did has no name, has no excuse, has no forgiveness. I know. If you came to clear your conscience before dying, I'm sorry. I can't give you that peace." He raised his eyes to me for the first time. "I don't deserve peace. I just came because I needed to say it, for you to know that I recognize the monster I was." We remained silent for a time that seemed eternal. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the porch with orange tones. From inside the house came the smell of dinner my mother was preparing, unaware of the visit we had. "My mother can't see you here," I finally said. "It would be too much for her." "I didn't come for her. I came for you." He made an effort to get up, leaning heavily on the cane. "I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted you to know that I never accused you. When they asked me what had happened, I said I fell in the creek drunk. My fault." I didn't answer. I accompanied him to the gate, keeping my distance like someone escorting an intruder out of the house. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "You look like your grandmother," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "She was always stronger than me." And so he went away, dragging himself along the sidewalk, leaning on his cane, a pathetic figure that in no way resembled the monster of my nightmares. I stood watching until he turned the corner and disappeared, a mix of contradictory emotions crossing me like waves. I didn't tell my mother about the visit. She had suffered too much. She didn't need this ghost resurfacing in her life. I told only Charles, who hugged me in silence while I cried, not from pain or fear, but from relief. A cycle that was closing, an old wound that even never completely healing, finally stopped bleeding. 3 months later, we received the news. My grandfather had died in a charity hospital in Jacksonville, alone, without family, without anyone to hold his hand. In the final moments, I felt a strange compassion for that man who in the end reaped exactly what he had sown. Loneliness, abandonment, contempt. "May God have mercy on his soul," was all my mother said when she found out. Because I can't. Life continued its course. I graduated from nursing school in June 1982 at 30 years old. It was a day of immense pride. Me, daughter of a domestic worker, granddaughter of a mill worker, now a graduated nurse. My mother cried throughout the entire ceremony, holding tightly to Charles's hand, whom she already considered as a son. We married in December of the same year, in a simple ceremony at St. John's Episcopal Church in downtown Savannah. I, who thought I would never be able to trust any man, was now taking a step that seemed impossible years ago. It wasn't easy. The intimacy of marriage brought challenges that only someone who has gone through trauma like mine can understand. But Charles, with his infinite patience, his constant respect, never pressured me, never made me feel guilty for the difficulties. In 1984, we were blessed with the birth of our daughter Antonia, named in honor of my grandmother, who had the strength to stand up that night, even while sick, to defend me. And in 1986, our son Peter came, completing our family. I continued working at the hospital, but now with a special focus on a project I helped create, a centre for caring for women and children victims of sexual violence. It was pioneering work at the time when little was talked about these issues, when the blame still fell on the victims. My personal experience, which for so many years was an open wound, now transformed into an instrument to heal other wounds. My mother lived with us until the end, helping to raise the grandchildren, finally enjoying the peace and security she deserved all her life. She passed away peacefully in 1998, at 72 years old, victim of a massive stroke. Until her last day, she maintained that silent strength, that dignity that not even the worst moments could take from her. The years went by. The children grew up, followed their paths. Antonia became a doctor like her father. Peter chose law, specializing in defense of women victims of violence. Both know my story. I decided there would be no secrets, not in this new generation, that they would understand from an early age the value of respect, of consent, of dignity. Charles and I grew old together, seeing grandchildren being born, building a life that despite the scars at the start was rich in love and achievements. He retired in 2005 after years dedicated to pediatrics. I continued for a few more years until fatigue and age made me stop as well. And now, at 75 years old, this same destiny that took so many turns in my life presents me with its last challenge: the pancreatic cancer that in a few months will take me away. It's ironic that it's the same disease that killed my grandfather so many years ago, as if somehow our destinies were tied by an invisible thread that neither time nor distance could cut. But unlike him, I don't leave alone. I have my family around me, the love of my husband who grew old with me, my children, my grandchildren. I have the clear conscience of someone who, despite the wounds, chose not to become a wound, of someone who transformed pain into purpose, trauma into strength to help others. If I tell this story now, it's not to cause pity, nor to receive praise for a strength that, honestly, I don't know where it came from. I tell it because I know that out there, perhaps watching this video at this exact moment, there are girls and women going through the same hell I went through, suffering silently, thinking there is no way out, that they don't deserve better, that it's their fault. To you, my dears, I want to say there is a way out. There is a new beginning. There is healing. Not complete perhaps, but enough to build a dignified, happy, full life. It's not easy. It's not quick. It's not magical. It's a process of days, months, years, sometimes a lifetime. But it's possible. I am living proof of that. As I prepare to leave this world, I take with me the certainty that despite everything, I managed to bloom in a terrain that was made only of thorns. I managed to transform poison into medicine. The frightened girl from Willow Creek, the teenager who arrived in Savannah with nothing but the clothes on her back and the scars on her soul, managed to become a woman, a mother, a professional, a person who, I dare say, made a difference in this world. If this story touched your heart, please leave your comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. Each new subscription is an encouragement for other women like me to find the courage to share their stories, to break the silence that protects abusers and blames victims. Our Grandparents' Tales channel is dedicated to bringing stories like mine to light, giving voice to the elderly who have lived through hard times and have wisdom to share. My time here is ending, and I say goodbye with a feeling of mission accomplished. The wounds that not even time could completely erase served for something greater, to show that it is possible to bloom even among thorns, that the worst abuse, the worst violence, the worst betrayal does not define who we are unless we allow it. And I never allowed.